Right, welcome everybody. Welcome to this Career 101, which today we're going to be looking at negotiation. And the title of this chat is Negotiation Scares the Hell Out of Me. And what we're going to do today is just look at some tips and some tricks into how and why you can prepare and set yourself up for success when you're actually going to go in and do a negotiation, whatever that negotiation happens to be. Now, why listen to us? Well, I'm Paul Horwood. I'm a veterinary surgeon. I qualified about 20 years ago. And for about 15 years of my career, I was a owner, partner, director of a large farm animal practice. And so often sat on the other side of the table, negotiating, employing, being the employer of quite a number of vets. And now over the last few years, I actually teach and train big companies on how to negotiate better. Alex.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I'm probably the guy who negotiation scares the hell out of, or at least I was a few years ago. So my name's Alex Appelby, and I'm actually an engineer, and I run a tech startup. I've been an employee, and a few years ago, 3 years ago, I set up a business, and since then I've employed a dozen people, raised over £1 million of funding, and had to get really comfortable quickly with negotiation. So this has been a learning journey for me, and I hope to share some of those experiences.
Grand. So starting off, I suppose we should have a look at what actually is negotiation. It's not just salaries. Often when you think of negotiation, you think of fighting with your employer over how much you're going to get paid. But it's so much more than that. It's the entire package. In fact, it's even more than just your job. If you think about your day-to-day life, if you think about your life in general up to this point, you've been negotiating. This morning when you got up, you were negotiating. If you've got kids, you certainly will have been negotiating. I spent 20 minutes having a chat with my two about whether or not they could have juice and whether they should put their pants on. That is negotiation. Those skills are still the same that you're going to use when you're with your employer or whether you're with your employees.
So we're filming on a Sunday, Paul. How did you negotiate that with your family?
It was, please have some juice. If you put them on, we can go downstairs for breakfast. If you don't, it's not. And then my little one then came back with some great things. But juice and a biscuit? Well, okay. So it's great back and forwards, and we'll have a chat about that in a sec. But that's the idea of negotiation. Those skills are not just confined to your job, and not just confined to that first 10 minutes before you accept your job. It's important to realize, obviously going from that, it's not a conflict, okay? You are not trying to win. A lot of times we think of negotiation as a one person wins, one person loses, one person gets ripped off and the other person doesn't. It's not that. We're not used car salesmen. Often when we're trying to have a negotiation, after that's finished, we've then got to have a relationship with that person going forwards. Your kid, your partner, your employer. If you end up for the next 5, 10, 15 years feeling that you were ripped off, you are not going to be a great employee or a great employer. So it's important that we're looking for that cliche win-win situation, not a fight, not a gloves on, not a punch bag to try and beat each other. And also, often, I think we value people more if they've done a bit of negotiation. Alex, you've got a great anecdote on that.
Yeah, I mean, I will first say, negotiation really did scare me a lot, even just a few years ago, to the extent that I wouldn't admit it, but I would feel physically a little bit nervous going into a negotiation, because I thought it was as you call it, Paul, like a kind of somebody wins, somebody loses. But I think what we're talking about here is business and employers and employees, and you are always going to have an ongoing relationship with that person. Even if you don't think you are in business, you want to have a good reputation. And thinking about it as something where you're going to have an ongoing relationship really helped me, because it takes away the kind of edge to it, and and it feels a bit more comfortable. So a particular example, I've just hired someone literally just now, and they wanted a 35,000 salary or more. We could only offer a 30,000 salary. So there's a gap there, and I had to be honest. I said, look, if you want the highest salary, we're not going to be able to offer you that. But there are various other things we can offer you. We can offer you to support your training that you're trying to do this year. We can give you some equity in the business. And we had a constructive conversation about that. And in the end, I realized that he probably would have accepted 30, but it would have left him feeling undervalued. So we actually actively went out of our way to increase the budget to 32.5, so sort of taking it up towards what he wanted, because that extra £2,500, relatively speaking for us, is not that much compared to if he failed as an employee and we had to hire someone else. And if it's going to make the difference between him feeling valued and doing an amazing job, it's worth every penny. And that's just my most recent experience of negotiating. And I think he feels great about it. And I think, just having that little bit of give and take is going to go a long way.
I think sometimes employees come into the negotiation and they want an extra £1,000 or £2,000 salary, and they feel a little bit nervous or a little bit embarrassed about asking that. Just remember it from the employer's point of view. The difference between employing a good or a bad employee is tens of thousands of pounds. Every time an employer has to go through an employment process, we're probably talking about 12, 14, 15,000 pounds for the employer in terms of management time, advertising, time to interview, etc., etc. So I think most employers would be happy to be talking about a few £1,000s if we end up with an awesome employee at the end of it. So don't be too worried about asking for what you think you're worth.
And Paul, on your point you said about value, well, my co-founder, director, and we said to each other, he's pretty good at negotiating. When he's on our team, that's going to stand us in good stead. So in the end, we think really positively about it.
Yeah, point to think about. If you're employing someone for a job that's client focused and client facing, then having that ability to talk about money, that's got to be a benefit. That's got to be a bonus. Think of all the vets that we have to, we all have to talk about money with our clients. That's a benefit if we're a bit more comfortable talking about it.
Paul, should we move on to the next section?
Yeah.
So, why negotiate? I mean, we've given a bit of an intro there, and I hope that gives some idea, but there are some really hard kind of important numbers and figures around why you should negotiate. Firstly, whether you like it or not, you can't bury your head in the sand. The other side, the other person, they are negotiating. Even if you don't know it, they're negotiating. So if you don't negotiate, you're not even participating, and you will end up worse off because unfortunately, sadly, you do not get paid what you're worth. I definitely thought early on in my career that I would just get paid when I do a good job. Someone's going to give me a salary increase and I get paid what I was worth. And I got pretty upset when it started to dawn on me that wasn't happening and wasn't going to happen. So the only person who's going to represent you is you. And let me give you a little example that brings this into kind of hard focus. So let's say coming out of university, you're graduating and you are negotiating your first salary. Well, there's some studies done, and it was found that on average within this study group, those who did negotiate their first salary ended up with a 7.4% higher initial salary than those who did not. So if you are negotiating, if you're starting on a salary of £30,000, that means if you tried to negotiate on average, you would end up with 32 and a bit thousand pounds. Great, doesn't really seem like much, but over the course of your career, what happens is when you get a pay rise, that pay rise comes on top of the salary you already have. So if on average you negotiated that first salary and then nothing else, and every year you got a 5% increase, whether you negotiated it or not, by the end of your 30-year career, that's £150,000 extra that you would have had if you just negotiated one thing, the starting salary. But it's not only that. As Paul said, one of the ways of measuring kind of how much value someone is to a business is how much they get paid. And so there is a certain likelihood that if you negotiated your first salary and got paid a little bit more, you might end up with more than a 5% bonus. You might end up with a 6%, just because you're considered to be more valuable, because you're being paid more. So let's say in this study, if you had negotiated that first salary, you end up with a 6% bonus every year increase. And if you did not, you just get the 5%. Now, by the end of your 30-year career, that means that initial negotiation earned you an extra £500,000 throughout your career. So that one negotiation earned you a house. And when you look at it like that, it's ridiculous. And so if you're not prepared to negotiate for yourself because you feel uncomfortable about it, think about how that would benefit your family or those depending on you.
Wow, that's a serious amount of money. Right, how do we make sure, how do we improve the chances of you getting that 5 or 6% increase in when you go in and do your negotiation? Now, a lot of people, and certainly me, when I first did negotiation, I thought it was actually, it started and stopped when you're in the room across the desk doing the negotiation. No, a huge part of whether or not you're successful is the preparation. So, you can perhaps take this from the military. If the military are ever coming up with a plan, their first thing they think about is what is the enemy doing and why. Now, the other party is not the enemy, but what I'm trying to say there is put yourself in their shoes. Before you start thinking about yourself, what do they want? Put yourself in the employer's shoes. What are they looking for? What sort of vet do they want? What are the skills they want, etc., etc. How do you find that out? Well, you can obviously look at the job advert, but also get online, look at the practice website, look at LinkedIn, try and ask who's the person who's going to be interviewing me. Well, we'll have a look at their LinkedIn, have a chat with your alumni, your Facebook friends. Has anyone else worked in that practice, or do you know anyone who's worked there? Glass doors, etc. There's a huge amount of research you can do online, quickly doing a bit of internet stalking to work out what it is that the employer is looking for. Then you don't lie, but you can, instead of vomiting all of your skills, you can select those skills that are really going to answer the employer's questions and focus in on those. You can also do a bit of salary benchmarking. In the UK, we've got a SPIV survey, where there are other ways you can ask your friends, your colleagues, to try and get an idea of what sort of salaries are out there and getting a range of that. So that's your research before on looking at your potential employer. Now you then need to look at yourself internally, be a bit, have a little think about what you're wanting from the job. Now, if you're actually suddenly presented with things to negotiate on in the interview or in the negotiation, it can be a little bit of a blind side, like, wow, what do I do? I'm a bit emotional, I'm a bit worried. So do this beforehand. Literally sit down and have 3 columns and have must have, I absolutely must have this in my job. Like to have, it'd be nice to have this in my job. And my red lines, I will not have these things, okay? And then go down, not just for salary, okay? So obviously salary is going to be in there, but salary might be, I would like to have 35,000. I will not accept below 29,000, something like that. You've already thought about it. But also think about your rota, your species that you're going to cover, the immense number of days you're going to work, whether you do an out of hours or not, how much support you're going to have from the practice, so that you can then work out on all of these factors. And this is where you then can sit down and go, I want all the must-haves, I want none of the I will not haves, and now I've got the bit to negotiate on, the likes, the bits I'd like to have. And those are the areas that you can then go back and forwards on. You might not get quite as much salary, but you get a better rota. You might not have the salary you want, but you get more support. By doing that before you go into the job, into the negotiation, you're much more likely to have made the right decisions, because you're non-emotional, you're calm, you've got time to think it over, you've got time to chat with others about it.
Paul, someone gave me some really good advice on that. Now, I'm the kind of person who's quite happy winging it, you know, just like making up as I go along. I don't know why. Sometimes it works, but in negotiation, please don't do that. So this preparation ahead of time is really valuable. And somebody said to me, whatever time you think you're going to spend actually negotiating, you should really be spending at least double the amount of time preparing for it. Like really, because then you know what you're looking for. And actually what I find personally is that helps me to prevent me feeling emotional, because it's just a business decision. You know, these are the things I'm looking for, and let's see what we can get. And actually that ends up having a more constructive relationship. I get less worried. We're also less likely to get into an argument because I'm prepared and I know what I'm looking for, and it's either yes or it's either no. Another top tip, whatever your red lines are, try this. Write them down on a little piece of paper, put them in your back pocket when you go in to negotiate, because it's once you're actually discussing, it's so easy to somebody to say, yes, 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 I'll accept that. But when you've written them down and you put them in your back pocket, you know that you're accountable to yourself, that you did have some limits or some red lines or some things you wanted.
I like that. Keep the emotion out of it. Absolutely.
Should we move on to the next section?
Yes.
Cool. So we've got just a little section here that we wanted to talk about ethics. Now, I've got actually a worksheet, and I'm going to make this available afterwards. And I would really recommend all of you, no matter whether you feel really comfortable with negotiation or not, to just complete this short exercise. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Let me give you the background on it. What is acceptable ethics? So if you're negotiating, do you feel like the other person's going to screw you over? Do you feel like they're going to lie to you? How does that make you feel? This is an area that's not, it's not, I would say, widely talked about, but I think is really important. Now, this worksheet is going to give you a number of questions, 15 questions, and each one gives a scenario. For example, how would you feel if somebody across the table from you promised you something that they knew they couldn't offer? You'd probably feel pretty bad, right? Equally, how would you feel if I was negotiating with Paul and I never really met Paul, I didn't really like him, but I just pretended I liked him just to make the process go a bit smoother? How would you feel about that? Would you do that? So there are various questions that go through that type of thing. And I challenge you to give an answer as to how ethically comfortable you are with that or not. And I think as you go through, certainly what became apparent to me is that there actually is no black and white. There are areas where you're like, yeah, that's awful. I wouldn't never do that. Or yeah, I'd probably do that. But actually there really are a lot of gray areas. Now, it's important to be aware of this specifically because the other person across the table from you is probably going to have a slightly different opinion or mindset. They're probably going to have slightly different lens they're looking through. Now, once you've filled out this worksheet, have your friend or your colleague or whoever you're locked down with also fill out the worksheet independently and then swap them over and look at your answers. And what you'll probably find is there are a few times where you disagree with one another. And that doesn't necessarily make the other person a bad person. That's just reality. And so I wanted to just sort of open up this topic because for me, it was quite freeing, again, to help me remove my emotions, to realize that there's going to be a few disagreements. There's going to be a few areas where we do things differently. That's absolutely okay. That's just human nature. And it's just important to be aware of it. So, summary, I would say for ethics, there are no universal truths. Certain people you might not want to negotiate with because they don't see the world through the same lens as you, but really nobody has a universal truth on what is right or wrong. And others may respond differently. And just be aware of that. So do that in your own time. It's a little exercise to do. It'll just take you about 5 minutes. And certainly for me, I found it quite enlightening. So I'll leave you with that.
Cool. Interesting stuff. Grant, thanks, Alex. So we're just going to finish up now and hope that this has been quite useful. What we've been looking at is sort of understanding what negotiation actually is, having a look and trying to explain why it is worth bothering to put the effort in, explaining that preparation is key to achieving or improving the chances of you getting the outcome that you want. And now all I'd say is if you want to do more, there's another talk coming up which is going to look at actually what to do in the face-to-face negotiations. Obviously today we've been talking about getting in the right mindset and preparing yourself for those situations. Yeah, so check out Mel's talk and it should dovetail nicely and pick up from where we left off, I think. Great. Lovely to speak to you guys. Good luck with your negotiations. Please negotiate your salaries. If not for yourself, for your families. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Bye. See you, Paul. Bye.